I see it in very simplistic terms. It, you know, Israel's security can only be guaranteed based upon Lebanese sovereignty. Hezbollah wouldn't exist today if Israel withdrew from Lebanon. Hezbollah exists only because of Israel's illegal occupation of Lebanon. Of course, that is the initial occupation in the 1980s. People say, where is this going? I remind people that Israel has been kicked out of Lebanon once before by Hezbollah, and Hezbollah will kick Israel out again. That's what's going to happen. Israel has lost this war. Israel has no negotiating position. Iran will not buckle. The United States is agreement incapable. Understand that. The Iranians understand that. You understand that. I understand that. It doesn't matter what J.D. Vance says because the United States cannot keep its word. The United States has placed Israeli security ahead of Lebanese sovereignty. That's the whole power equation that's taking place here. Israel gets to bomb Beirut anytime it wants to in the name of Israeli security, but Hezbollah is not allowed to retaliate against Israel in the interest of Lebanese sovereignty. And the only reason, again, why Hezbollah continues to have a militia is because Israel continues to illegally occupy southern Lebanon. The legitimacy of the continuity of the Hezbollah militia disappears immediately the moment Israel leaves all of southern Lebanon, the moment that Lebanon restores sovereignty to every square inch of Lebanese territory. And that's the only solution that's acceptable here. J.D. Vance and Iran can come up with, a mechanism, a deconfliction mechanism, but it doesn't work if the deconfliction is premised that on the notion of Israeli security taking precedence over everything, including Lebanese sovereignty. I just, again, will remind you, Israel was kicked out of Lebanon once before by Hezbollah. And if Israel wants to continue the fight on its terms, it will be kicked out of Lebanon again by Hezbollah.
We know if they attack again Hezbollah, one of the reasons that Iran didn't respond to the latest Israeli attack in Beirut, in Dahia, was the negotiations between Iran and the United States, because it seems that Donald Trump tried to do his best to put in place some sort of ceasefire, which wasn't the ceasefire until the MOU was signed. Then the later meetings on the that 14 point, the first one is the case of Lebanon. And do you think that as time goes by, if Israel attacks, let's assume you said that Israel will attack and Hezbollah would respond, how do you see the Iranian government responding to Israel and the reaction from the United States?
It's just crystal clear. The MOU is not in effect unless all aspects of the MOU are in effect. If Israel attacks Lebanon, the MOU is not in effect. And if the MOU is not in effect, then Iran will retaliate. And Iran has shown that the first time. It struck Israel when Israel struck Lebanon. It will do so again. Israel got a pass this time because the United States said it will rein in Israel. The United States is agreement incapable. Israel is agreement incapable. They do not negotiate in good faith. Iran knows this better than anybody. So what will happen? If Israel attacks Lebanon, Iran will retaliate against Israel. What will the United States do? Nothing. The United States is desperate for an agreement. The Strait of Hormuz must remain open. If the United States attacks Iran will do what it did last time, shut down the Strait of Hormuz. And it's just interesting for people to understand the more uncertainty that exists out there, even if Iran says the Strait of Hormuz is open, understand that, the companies that insure the shipping that needs to go through the Strait of Hormuz, they're not insuring the shipping. Why would they? Why would they insure a ship going through a strait that could be shut down at any time and the ship gets hit and sunk? So, the United States is Donald Trump is in a very, very difficult situation. This isn't about the complexities of any geopolitical, it's about Donald Trump's political survival, which hinges on the American economy, which is being choked to death because of the Strait of Hormuz situation. So Donald Trump has to get the strait open in a consistent manner because if oil doesn't start flowing, then the consequences of the energy security crisis that was precipitated by Trump's stupidity in launching this conflict to begin with are not going to be rectified in time to have an impact on the November midterm elections. And that's what this is all about. It's the economy, stupid. Donald Trump has to get an uptick in the American economy that gets the American voters to believe that he has their best interests in mind. And he can't do that if the Strait of Hormuz continues to be choked. And, that's where we're at right now.
do you think, the Strait of Hormuz has been used to put pressure on the United States, then the United States putting pressure on Israelis to not attack Lebanon, not to attack Hezbollah or people and cities and villages in Lebanon? Is that going to work, or are we getting, or we're headed towards some sort of new round of war between Iran and Israel without that much of participation of the United States as it was before?
I think we're headed to a new round of conflict between Israel and Iran. But I believe that the United States, because look, Iran, I can't speak for the Iranian government, but they've been pretty clear. It's all or nothing. They're not going to allow the MOU to be cherry picked by the United States. It needs to be implemented in full, or there is no agreement. They've walked out of negotiations before, and I believe they'll walk out of negotiations again. And they've shown a willingness to attack nations that are involved in the violations of the MOU. So Israel would definitely be attacked. The question is, what will the United States do? What will Donald Trump do? I think now, the nature of the relationship between Netanyahu and Trump has changed, because now we're looking at Trump's existential political survival being on the line. The midterm elections, it's the end of Donald Trump. It's the end of the Trump legacy. And a narcissist can't allow that to happen. And so now he sees Benjamin Netanyahu as being the man responsible for the demise of the Trump brand. And Trump is a very vengeful person. So, we may be looking at a complete reworking of the U.S.-Israeli relationship in the near future. And can Israel survive that? I don't think Benjamin Netanyahu's political career can survive that. This is a man who has repeatedly come to the United States to go to Congress to wrap himself in the shroud of endless applause. He needs American support in order to retain his legitimacy at home. If Trump pulls the cord, that's the end for Netanyahu. So, I see Israel being compelled to leave Lebanon, one way or another.
Yeah. Because look at that. You've mentioned the midterm elections, and right after the midterm elections, we're going to have 2028 presidential elections with J.D. Vance, it seems, coming to the scene, talking about the conflict, and he's trying to bring everything, together and to resolve the issue. Is because of 2028, in my opinion. Is he prepared to sacrifice everything for Israel, for the case of Israel? And to be honest, the way that Donald Trump is talking to Israelis is somehow new. We haven't that much of history. They're talking to each other, putting pressure publicly, humiliating. Let's assume that it's all about a political theater. But after all, he's humiliating Benjamin Netanyahu and his administration. Is that
Netanyahu is humiliating himself? Let's be very clear on this. He's not an innocent actor here. It's not that Benjamin Netanyahu has been doing the right thing and that evil Donald Trump's coming up and embarrassing this man. Benjamin Netanyahu is a murderous, genocidal thug. He's a criminal of proportions that are only matched by some of the greatest criminals in history. Adolf Hitler comes to mind. So I don't get any sympathy with Donald, to Bibi Netanyahu when Donald Trump turns on him. It's about time that an American president turned on an Israeli leader in this fashion. J.D. Vance will not go down with the ship. Meaning that he's not going to sit there and fall on the sword for the state of Israel. He's there to represent Donald Trump in the United States, and he will take his guidance from Donald Trump on behalf of the United States. And I think you've already seen J.D. Vance starting to tighten the language regarding Israel. So Israel's toast. We can just leave it at that. This is a situation Israel's not going to get out of. They've backed themselves into a corner. They will have to leave Lebanon, and in doing so, it will be the end of Benjamin Netanyahu. I just want to remind everybody that back in September of 2023, before the October 7th attacks by Hamas on Israel, the Israeli president was warning about the fact that Israel is sliding towards civil war, not civil resistance, civil disobedience, civil war, armed fighting between Israels. And that's how this is going to end. This is going to end with an Israeli civil war, because Benjamin Netanyahu has polarized the nation to such extremes. And, in the end, the people that are promoting this war understand that the political survival is dependent upon this war continuing until an Israeli victory that isn't going to come. But they can't afford to acknowledge that, because that's the end of them politically. And so I think we're looking at an Israeli civil war coming, violence between Israelis.
is that going to change the political system of Israel? We know that Benjamin Netanyahu, he is a genius for such a long time. He genius in manipulating the political system in the United States, playing both sides, somehow manipulating the whole system in favor of Israel, and getting the support militarily, politically, geopolitically from the United States. Let's assume he's going to be replaced with someone like Naftali Bennett. Is Israel going to remain in the same position the way that they were somehow getting support from the United States? Or you see, as the head of his state, as the head of Israel, prime minister is changing, you see that sort of leverage somehow disappearing from the scene in the United States, considering AIPAC, which is a very important and was defeated, by the way, in New York again. In the recent, that what has happened in New York. You see the mayor of New York going against the candidate of AIPAC. They have defeated him by a landslide, in my opinion. How do you see that front?
Again, Israel has never put the United States in the position that we're at in today. Israel has always said we need America's support before we attack Iran, and America's always said no. And so Israel has never forced the American people to deal with, for instance, the economic consequences of bad policy. Go back and take a look at the, what happened at the, in the oil embargo in the 1970s and the fluidity of American policy towards the Middle East at that time. Why? It's the economy, stupid. It's the economy, stupid. It's the economy, stupid. Israel, AIPAC has never allowed the situation to get where the American people had to look into empty wallets to decide whether or not they want to suffer on behalf of Israel. The American people have never been called upon to suffer on behalf of Israel. It's always been a free ride for the American people. Just give them more money, give them more money, give them more money, and accept money. We accepted the two-way street of allowing Israel to buy our Congress. As long as at the end of the day, the American people continue to wrapped in a cocoon of comfort and could be lulled to sleep by the nonsense put forward by the mainstream media, the American people would tolerate this. The American people will not tolerate empty wallets, empty banks. They will not tolerate a collapsed economy because of Israel. And the American people will turn on Israel. This is the reality that Israel has always known, but Benjamin Netanyahu has forgotten because he had reached the end of his tether. The only way Netanyahu stays in power after October 7th is to basically continue to escalate the cycle of violence and say, I'm the only man capable of having Israel emerge from the cycle victorious. Well, now he's gone to at the end. He got the United States to go to war against Iran. This was supposed to be the end all. We defeat the Iranians. Everything is wonderful. Instead, he got his butt handed to him, defeated by Iran. America, defeated by Iran. Let's keep in mind what a surrender ceremony looks like. A surrender ceremony looks like Japanese coming on board the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay in September of 1945. Unconditional surrender. That's what surrender looks like. Donald Trump sitting by himself in Versailles signing a document that means nothing is not a surrender ceremony, except to him surrendering to the Iranians because the MOU was dictated by Iran to the United States. People need to understand that. Donald Trump signed a surrender document. He's just not calling it that. But the MOU is designed to give Iran what it wants from this conflict, not what the United States wants. And we need to understand that. And Donald Trump will never forgive Benjamin Netanyahu for putting him in this situation. And the American people are not going to sit there and say, but Israel, when they have empty wallets. They're going to say, goodbye, Israel. And so that's where we're at right now. Israel controls nothing. Nothing. It's always been, an illusion of control. As I said, as long as you could hypnotize the American public into believing that everything's hunky-dory, the economy's going well, they'll accept just about anything in the foreign policy world because the American people are the most ignorant people in the world about the world that they live in. They can't point half these places out on a map, let alone talk about the nuances and complexities of the policies that underpin, the actions, the geopolitical realities. We're ignorant. We're stupid. We don't know anything. This is why we're susceptible to Russophobia, Islamophobia, all the other phobias out there. We're trained to be fearful of that which we don't know. And because we don't know it, we rely on the opinions of others, mainstream media, social media. I mean, there's so many Americans who just turned to X right now. And, Elon Musk has done he's altered the algorithm so much that literally your feed is just flooded with pro-Israeli and pro-Ukrainian nonsense. And most Americans don't have the time to do the actual digging, so they're superficial. They go in when X inundates them with a certain narrative. After a while, the Goebbels thing, if you tell a lie long enough, people will begin to think it's the truth. And this is what's happening on X. This is what's happening on social media. This is happening in the mainstream media. But at the end of the day, the one thing you can't lie your way out of is an empty wallet. Words don't fill the wallet. Words don't buy groceries. Words don't put food on the table. Words don't pay a mortgage. They don't pay utility bills. Money does. Money talks. It's the economy, stupid. And Netanyahu forgot that.
Yeah. Israel desperately wants, they desperately want the United States to stay in the region. But it seems, as you've just mentioned, Donald Trump doesn't want that. I don't know how much. Is it a calculation based on the economy of the United States or domestic policy? The time is so important, by the way. The rest, they have 2.5 years of the Trump presidency, as we have the midterm election. Later on, we have presidential election. So staying in the fight, do you think, is there any sort of possibility, a new round of war between Iran and the United States?
No, not until after the midterm elections. But Congress has already said no to more war. Didn't you see what was what the Senate passed? Congress is done with this war. They're not going to fund it. This is a stupid war. But moreover, we can't win it. Donald Trump knows we can't win. So what's he going to go into round 2 about? The whole concept right now is the world economy is being choked to death because the Strait of Hormuz isn't operating the way it should be. And it's not operating the should be because of the stupidity of Donald Trump. If he goes to war, again, the Strait of Hormuz is closed. And then what you said, is it about the economy or about domestic American politics? The economy is the only factor in domestic American politics that matters. At the end of the day, the Americans vote their wallet. And what Donald Trump is doing right now, why the MOU is happening now, remember, the same MOU that we're talking about today, near the end of June, was offered to Donald Trump in April. It's the same document. Nothing's changed. The Iranians haven't changed their position at all. It's the United States that had to come to the Iranian position. That's why I say Donald Trump signed a surrender document, because he had to concede this. Why? Well, the head of Chevron said, we're looking at a oil supply situation that's unprecedented in history coming up, no matter what happens. Even if the Strait of Hormuz opens today, for the next 4 to 6 weeks, we're having a global energy crisis. Because even if you get all the oil in the world out of the ground today and on ships moving to refineries, it's not going to hit the economy for another month and a half. And we've got down to about zero. Nothing's flowing. And so there's going to be an impact, and it's going to cause tremendous problems. What the president needs is sometime around September for the uptick in the economy, just to go click. Because the American people are stupid, dumber than dirt. All we care about is money in our wallet. And if we got enough money in our wallet to buy a pizza and buy some beers on Friday night after work, we're happy. God bless the president. USA, USA, we're number one. Because we're eating pizza, drinking beer, and having a good time. But if the price of oil goes up to where our energy costs go up and that money that buys pizza and beer dissipates, at the end of the week, we're miserable. And we're blaming somebody. We're blaming the person responsible for the high gas prices. That's Donald Trump. The buck stops here. Harry Truman knew that. Donald Trump is learning that. So he needs in September an uptick, which means the Strait of Hormuz has to be opened now, right now, today. Because you go forward, we're already there. If he goes into a war again, we're flatlining on energy supplies for the globe, and that tick isn't going to happen until after November, and it's too late. And November is the key. He's going to lose the House. He lives in a fantasy world where he thinks he's not going to lose the House. But you just mentioned Mamdani's victory in New York City, and that I think is going to be reflected around the country. The Republican brand, the MAGA brand, they have their 30% that's never going to change, but the 20%, the RFK Jr. Libertarians, the Tulsi Gabbards Libertarians, they're not voting Trump this time. He betrayed them, and a lot of MAGA isn't going to vote Trump this time because he betrayed them. And so Trump is going to lose the House, which means his second term is going to be all about impeachment. They're going to impeach. Trump's only salvation is to hold on to the Senate, and so that he doesn't convicted, because conviction is the end of Donald Trump. Out, and his brand is gone. And the only thing, the ultimate narcissist that he is, The only thing he cares about isn't the American people. He cares about Trump brand. It's the greatest brand in the world. Well, no matter what happens, I think the Trump brand disappears in 2028. Republican, Democrat, whoever wins, Donald Trump is going to be the quickest jettisoned president in the history of jettisoned presidents. The American people aren't going to look back and go, oh, gee, I wish for the time of Donald Trump. They're going to call him the worst president in the history of the United States because he is the worst president in the history of the United States. But he's also one of the most corrupt men. He's shamed this nation, and the Trump brand is going to collapse. That's going to happen no matter what. But Donald Trump, the ultimate narcissist and egomaniac, has created a cult of personality. And so people tend to tell him what he wants to hear, which is, that's okay, Mr. President, you'll ride this thing out. And in the end, the Trump brand will be there forever. And the world's going to love you and America's going to love you. And you're just it. You're the man. But in order to do that, he has to survive the midterm elections. In order to do that, the Strait of Hormuz has to be kept open. He's not going to bomb Iran. He can't afford to bomb Iran. Bomb Iran to do what? We can't win. We already tried. Bomb with long-range standoff weapons we don't have. The Iranians have missiles. They've proven that. We can't shoot them down. They've proven that. So there's not going to be a resumption of the war because that is Donald Trump literally swallowing a bullet. He has to keep the strait open, and that's what they're going to be working on. Now, that doesn't mean that the MOU is going to be executed. It's not. The United States is agreement incapable. The Iranians know that. They know it. Going up front, the United States will never live up to its agreement, ever. Incapable of it. But Iran is interested in its own economic survival. It's the economy stupid in Iran. You know this. Ever since the Iran-Iraq war ended, when Rafsanjani said we got to make the revival of the economy our number one priority. Why do you think he took the Revolutionary Guard command and turned them into economic entrepreneurs? Because he's corrupt and all? No, because he had a body of people who were fanatics, and he had to get them engaged in something that kept the country going. So the Revolutionary Guard command became involved in the economy, and they're heavily involved in the economy. They need the economy to succeed. It can only succeed if you are allowed to have trade with important trading partners, Russia, China, and others. Yeah. And so the compromise that will be made is that even though the MOU will be not executed in totality, Strait of Hormuz will remain open, and Iran will be allowed to do business with nations sufficient to get the economy going. And both the Iranians and the United States will accept this gray zone of activity. Because the Iranians understand all they have to do is wait out. Benjamin Netanyahu's history. He's going to be eaten by the people of Israel. And Donald Trump is history too. Starting in January of next year, he'll be paralyzed. All the Iranians have to do is wait until January. Donald Trump will be paralyzed. The United States has no appetite for war. And they'll, by default, get what they need.
JD Vance, in one of his, I think his podcast yesterday, he said the guy who was interviewing him was, he asked him, did you know about the Strait of Hormuz, the importance of the Strait of Hormuz before starting this war? He said, yeah, we knew what would be the outcome, but the extent of what has happened, it was greater than what we thought. And the other important point was the geography of the region. When you go to war, you have to understand the geography, that it wasn't totally perceived by the Americans. But I think he's somehow, maybe he's lying because...
He's lying through his teeth.
Yeah.
We know this because in Trump's first term, even though J.D. Vance wasn't part of the first term, you remember the Global Hawk drone was shot down over the Strait of Hormuz. And at that time, Donald Trump wanted to retaliate against Iranian air defense. And he actually ordered an airstrike. Over 100 airplanes were in the air, ready to bomb. That's a lie. But the point is, the Pentagon turned to him and said, no, Mr. President, if you strike the air defense, that'll begin a pattern of escalation that ends with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, and we can't open it. And the Pentagon educated him on the reality of the geography and what it would take for the United States to open it. It'd take a year and a half, up to a year and a half of mobilization, 9 months to a year and a half. Over 900,000 Americans would have to be mobilized and then sent to Iran. Have to be a full-scale war. Because that's what it takes to open the Strait of Hormuz. And the Pentagon said, even then, we can't guarantee victory. So the president didn't retaliate. He claims that he did it out of empathy for the Iranian people. He didn't want to kill innocents. No, he did it because the Pentagon said we can't win that war. So the idea that Donald Trump, and the people around him were unfamiliar with the realities of the Strait of Hormuz and the geopolitical positioning of the country is absurd, because those realities weighed in on keeping Trump from escalating at the end of his first term. So this is a straight up lie. The problem here is Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth said, I can do this. I got the military to do this. And Donald Trump is so stupid that he believed him. And J.D. Vance is so inexperienced. Understand, J.D. Vance was a corporal who took photographs. He's not, some sort of hardened combat hero. He's not an officer. I'm not picking on enlisted Marines. They are the heart of the Marine Corps. But understand that a corporal's perspective is completely different from, say, a colonel's perspective. The corporal doesn't have to make any hard decisions. He just has to obey orders at the lowest possible level. But he doesn't have to worry about logistical sustainability. He doesn't have to worry about, politics. He doesn't have to worry about, any of the things. Being tactically proficient, and operationally competent. So J.D. Vance lacks any fundamental foundational military experience that enables him to evaluate. Yes, he's been through basic training. Yes, he was tested. Yes, he earned the title Marine, and I salute him for that. But the notion that J.D. Vance's military experience somehow gives him the ability to sit there and look at the overall strategic position is absurd in the extreme. He's never been called upon to do that. And even now, he plays a secondary role of, basically the man that rubber stamps policy. He has some political intuition derived from his former status as a MAGA superstar, understand that the American people don't want endless wars. He's smart enough to understand that. But he doesn't know anything about the nuances of Iran, about the reality of warfare. And if somebody would just ask follow-up questions, they find out quickly that J.D. Vance is just an empty suit. He literally knows nothing about that which he talks about.
We know that the change in the public opinion in the United States toward Israel is happening and has happened. More than 70%, 73% of the people were against the war in the Middle East. They said no to war. We don't want that war. But you see two sections were defined recently. One of them is 224. They want to merge the U.S. and Israeli military. They want to merge the two together. The other one is 622, if I'm not mistaken, 662, something like that. And that is talking about merging the two intelligence together. I don't know, Israel is part of Five Eyes or they're not part of Five Eyes. So they want to, because Five Eyes, we have some sort of the communication between the five countries, which is Australia, New Zealand, United Kingdom, Canada, and the United States. And Israel is not part of that, but they want to get more close to the advancement in the military side, the aspects or sectors of the United States and the intelligence, too important. And recently we've learned from the mainstream media, basically Wall Street Journal, if I'm not mistaken, reporting that Israelis are spying on the United States. These are, how do you put these things together? On one hand, you see the people are trying to entangle the United States into Israeli affairs and these continuous wars. On the other hand, you see the public